Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating and honestly kind of theatrical analysis of the current state of Nigerian politics. We're drawing entirely from a super sharp piece by Lawson Akigbe titled The Master Servant Farce: The Death of Nigerian Legislative Power. Akigbe essentially argues that the constitutional separation of powers in Nigeria hasn't just weakened, it's slowly morphed into a one-man show. We're going to look at exactly how the structural shift is happening, using some very specific and frankly pretty dramatic real-world examples. So let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive right into this. Akigbe writes, if the 18th century French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu were alive today and observing Nigerian state politics, he would not write The Spirit of the Laws, he would write a sitcom. I mean, what a hook, right? This perfectly sets the stage for our explainer today. The author is using this incredibly sharp sitcom metaphor to show us just how absurd the political reality on the ground has actually become, especially when you compare it to the foundational philosophical ideals the system was originally built on. Section 1. The Democratic Ideal, Montesquieu's Blueprint. To really grasp the absurdity the author is pointing out here, we first got to establish our baseline. Because, to understand the farce, you have to understand the ideal. The doctrine of the separation of powers is literally the absolute bedrock of modern democratic theory. It's this idea that you have three distinct co-equal arms of government: the executive to enforce laws, the legislature to make laws and control the budget, and the judiciary to interpret those laws. These three arms are meant to act in this constant state of tension, providing checks and balances against the tyranny of any single individual or group. Now, Akige points out a really important fact. In theoretical Nigeria, this sacred tripartite system is actually perfectly enshrined in the 1999 Constitution. So on paper, it is exactly as Montesquieu intended. Section 2. The Nigerian Reality, the Rewrite. But as we all know, paper and practice are two very different things, and this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast our sources bringing to our attention. In theoretical Nigeria, you have that robust tripartite system with the strong checks and balances we just talked about. But over in actual Nigeria, well, the democratic script has been heavily revised. The legislature doesn't actually check the executive. Instead, the author observes a system where the legislative branch curtsies, dutifully takes notes, and essentially asks the executive what time it should pack its bags and go home. That foundational independence of the institution is just entirely missing. To ground this theory in some actual reality, Akibe brings up the really curious case of Blessing Agbekabaku, who is the Speaker of the Edo State House of Assembly. According to the source, the Speaker essentially took on a side hustle as the governor's personal town crier. During an address about road projects, Agbekabaku proudly announced that Governor Monday Okpebolo had generously approved the construction. So the absolute crucial point the author makes here is constitutional. The parliament is explicitly supposed to be the body that appropriates and approves state expenditures. When the guy holding the purse strings speaks like a grateful beneficiary receiving alms from the executive, well, the institutional compass has completely lost its bearing. Section 3. A Hero's Resignation, the Performance. This leads us right into what the author views as the absolute peak of this political theater. Listen to this dramatic excerpt from Speaker Agbebaku's farewell address, which was delivered right there in the assembly chambers. I've been asked to resign. I think today I'm standing here as a hero. I also thank the governor. He stood by me to say, "You will be my speaker." Akigbe observes that this highly theatrical delivery sounds a lot less like a democratic legislative resignation and way more like an audition for the role of chief of staff. It's less of a political process and more a performance of pure loyalty. He goes on to say, and if he has a decision contrary to give his government a peaceful train ride, I think I have no choice than to obey His Excellency. Akigbe highlights this specific phrasing to emphasize what he identifies as the complete, ultimate surrender of legislative independence. Right here, you literally have the head of an ostensibly independent arm of government openly and publicly stating that he is taking direct operational orders from another branch. Section 4. Unpacking the Speech, the Script Review. Now, what's really interesting about this is let's actually slow down for a second and deconstruct these specific lyrical choices, because they act as direct evidence of a systemic institutional failure. Take the phrase, "my speaker." The structural meaning here is pure executive ownership. Notice that possessive pronoun? It's not the people's speaker, it's the governor's speaker, like an executive appliance just installed in the legislative hall. Next, the desire for a peaceful train ride. This basically translates to avoiding legislative friction at all costs. As the source notes, heaven forbid a parliament actually creates friction or demands accountability, right? A legislature that actually legislates is apparently viewed as an intolerable derailment risk. Then we have no choice than to obey. This is just the ultimate unfiltered surrender of constitutional duty. And finally, standing here as a hero. Akibe Riley notes that in this twisted political context, the classical definition of heroism has been totally redefined as meekly stepping aside the very second your executive boss tells you your shift at the parliament is over. Raw, unfiltered obedience is simply being masked as heroism. Section 5. The Master-Servant Farce. The Audience Impact. So, what does this all mean for the people watching? Well, Akigbe makes it abundantly clear that this isn't just some isolated incident in Edo State. It's indicative of a much broader master-servant dynamic playing out across the entire federation. State assemblies have just happily embraced this subservient role, where they exist primarily to approve budgets without even reading them, rubber stamp executive loans, and simply clear out whenever the government house decides it's time for a reshuffle. And Akigbe points out a deeply tragic element to all of this. There's a total absence of shame or pretense. In these highly theatrical speeches, there's no elaborate cover story about party dynamics, and there's certainly no mention of the actual constituents who voted these legislators into office in the first place. They've completely abandoned their fundamental duty to stand side by side with the executive and protect citizens from arbitrary power. Which brings us to a really provocative thought from our source material, and the final question we want to leave you with today. When the legislature exists only to ensure the governor's peaceful train ride, who is actually left to serve the citizens? Because when an independent branch of government willfully reduces itself to a mere employee of the executive branch, the joke isn't just on Montesquieu and his theories. The joke, tragically, is on the millions of citizens whose democratic mandate has been reduced to nothing more than a VIP ticket for the executive's unimpeded agenda. Thank you so much for diving into this structured breakdown with us today. Keep analyzing those power structures around you, and we'll see you in the next explainer.